You've been digging where you shouldn't, haven't you? Those trust documents weren't for your eyes. Dad put me in charge of the family assets because he knew I'd make the tough calls. You are always too soft for that kind of responsibility. My private fund was the only thing keeping this family from falling apart during tough times. Your little investigation is about to blow up everything. If you don't back off and keep your mouth shut, especially around that colleague of yours who's already asking questions, I'll make sure your career takes a hit you won't recover from. Sign the agreement to drop this and move on, or prepare to lose everything you've built. I'm not playing games anymore, little sister. Hi, my name is Olivia Parker. I am 29 years old. The words landed like ice water down my back. My older brother Ethan stood in the doorway of my small apartment just outside the city, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the quiet evening. He had shown up unannounced after I sent one careful email asking about some old family paperwork I had found while sorting through old files. I had not expected him to come in person. I had not expected the threat. I stepped back and let him in because part of me still hoped this could be fixed with words. The apartment was modest, the kind of place I had chosen after years of building my own stability in financial risk analysis at a downtown firm. Ethan looked around once the way he always did, like he was measuring what I had versus what he thought I deserved. He dropped a folded document on my kitchen counter without asking. Sign it, he said. It's a simple non-disclosure. You forget what you saw, I forget you went looking. Everyone moves on. I did not touch the paper. My hands stayed at my sides because I knew if I picked it up, my fingers would shake and he would see it. The trust our grandfather had created years ago was supposed to be straightforward. A portion of family assets set aside for future needs with clear instructions. Ethan had been named as a co-trustee alongside our father because he was older, already working in investments, already trusted with the big decisions. I had been the one who stayed out of the way, focused on my own path. That distance had apparently given him room to move things. The private Slush fund was not listed anywhere in the original paperwork I had pulled from the old safe deposit box. The transfers were small at first, then larger, always routed through accounts that looked like legitimate business expenses on the surface. I had only noticed because I was trying to understand why a recent request for help with a medical bill had been met with silence from my father and a vague, "we are tight right now" from Ethan. The numbers did not add up once I started tracing them. Ethan watched me now with that same steady stare he used when he wanted someone to back down without a fight. "You always did this," he continued, voice still quiet but edged. "You find one thing that looks off and suddenly you are the hero exposing everyone. Dad is not well. He does not need this stress. Mom does not need it. Sign the paper and let it go." I felt the old familiar ache in my chest, the one that came whenever he spoke about our parents like they were fragile things only he could protect. It was the same tone he had used when I was younger and asked why certain decisions about college funds or family property had gone through him first. Back then, I had told myself it was just how families worked when one sibling was already established. Now the ache mixed with something sharper. My phone buzzed on the counter. A message from James Rivera, my colleague at the firm, the one person I had cautiously mentioned the paperwork issue to over coffee 2 days earlier. James had simply written, "You sure you want to push this family stuff? Gets messy fast." Loyalty cuts both ways. The words sat there like a quiet warnings I had not asked for. I had not told James the full extent yet. I had only said I was looking into some old accounts and it was complicated. His response had already planted a small seed of doubt in the back of my mind about how this would look from the outside. Ethan saw the screen light up and smiled without warmth. "See, even your work friends are telling you to drop it. Smart people know when to leave things alone." I did not answer him right away. Instead, I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of the city below. The hillside enclave where our parents still lived sat farther up the road. Big houses with gates and views, the kind of place that made people assume everything inside was orderly and safe. From here, it looked peaceful. I knew better now. The betrayal had not started with one big theft. It had started with small permissions. Ethan asking our father to let him handle the paperwork because Dad was busy with his own work. Dad agreeing because Ethan had always been the reliable one. transfers labeled as management fees or investment reallocations that never quite circled back. A private account that grew while the original trust balance stayed flat or shrank when it should have been protected. I had the statements, I had the dates. What I did not have yet was the full picture of where the money had actually gone or how deep the deception ran. Ethan picked up the document again and held it out. Last chance before this gets ugly. You sign, I walk out, we never speak about it again. You keep digging and I protect what is mine. Dad will back me, he always has. I looked at the paper, then at my brother. The vulnerability I felt was real and raw, the same sting I had carried for years whenever family matters surfaced. And I was reminded how little my voice had counted. But under it was something else, something fierce that had been growing since the first mismatched number caught my eye. I was not going to sign. I met his eyes and kept my voice steady, even though my throat felt tight. I am not signing anything tonight, and I am not dropping this. Ethan's expression shifted, the calm mask cracking just enough to show the edge underneath. He set the paper down harder than necessary. Then you are choosing to make this a war. Do not say I did not warn you. He turned and left without another word, the door closing behind him with a quiet click that felt louder than a slam. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, the document still on the counter, James's message still glowing on my phone. The apartment felt smaller than it had 10 minutes earlier. I picked up the phone and read the message again. James was a good colleague, careful and smart, the kind of person who had helped me navigate tough client cases without drama. His caution made sense from his perspective. He did not know the full story. He did not know how long I had ignored the small signs because I wanted to believe the best about my own family. Part of me wanted to call him back and explain everything right then, to hear another voice tell me I was not overreacting. Another part of me knew that once I started talking, there would be no easy way to put it back. I opened my laptop instead and pulled up the folder I had started building. The transfers, the account numbers, the dates that lined up with times when our father had said money was tight, or when Ethan had suddenly had cash for a new car or a trip. It was not enough yet, not for what I needed to do, but it was a start. The next morning, at the office, I kept my head down and worked through my usual risk assessments. But my mind kept circling back to the kitchen counter and the way Ethan had looked at me like I was the problem. James stopped by my desk once with coffee and asked if everything was okay. I told him it was family stuff and I was handling it. He nodded, but I saw the question in his eyes. He did not push. I was grateful and also a little disappointed. Part of me had wanted him to push to force me to say more so I would not have to carry it alone. By the end of the week, I had a clearer picture. The Slush fund was not just sitting there. Money had moved out of it in patterns that looked like personal expenses disguised as business. Some of it had gone to accounts I could not immediately trace. One transfer had landed in a shell that dissolved quickly. It was the kind of thing that made my stomach turn because it was deliberate, calculated, done while our father signed off on documents he probably never read in full. I needed more. I needed something that could not be explained away as a misunderstanding. That was when Amanda Chen reached out. Amanda had worked for our family accountant years ago before moving to a larger firm. We had stayed loosely in touch through holiday cards and the occasional coffee when she was in town. Her message was short and careful. I saw something in an old file pull that might matter to you. Call me when you can, off the record. We met at a quiet cafe 2 days later. Amanda looked the same as always, professional and direct. She slid a single printed page across the table without preamble. It was an internal memo from the old accounting office dated 3 years earlier, summarizing a conversation between Ethan and the accountant about reallocating trust assets for liquidity and opportunity. The language was careful, but the intent was clear. Ethan had pushed for access, and the accountant had flagged it as unusual, but had ultimately processed the requests because our father had signed the authorizations. Amanda watched me read it. I kept a copy because it felt off at the time. I did not know who to tell back then. When I heard through the grapevine that you were asking questions, I figured you should see it. I thanked her and folded the page into my bag. My hands were steady, but inside everything felt raw and exposed. This was not a misunderstanding. This was documented. And our father had signed the papers that made it possible. The weight of it sat with me for days. I went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings where James gave me concerned looks, but did not ask again. I drove past the turn that would take me up to the hillside enclave twice without stopping. I was not ready to face our parents yet. I needed to understand how much our father had known and whether he had chosen to look the other way or had been actively part of it. The answer came sooner than I expected. Our mother called on a Thursday evening. Her voice was tired in a way I had not heard before. "Your father wants to talk to you. He says it is important. Can you come up this weekend?" I said yes, because I needed to hear it from him directly. The drive up the winding road felt longer than usual. The houses got larger, the gates more imposing. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan's car was already there. I had expected that. Our father was in the study, the same room where so many family decisions had been made without me in the room. He looked older than the last time I'd seen him, smaller in the big leather chair. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed, watching me like he was waiting for the explosion. I sat down across from our father and waited. He did not waste time with small talk. I signed the papers. "Ethan brought me," he said quietly. "I knew some of the money was moving. I thought it was for the family, for security." I did not ask enough questions. The admission landed heavier than any accusation Ethan could have thrown. Our father had known. Not every detail maybe, but enough to sign and enough to stay silent when questions should have been asked. The vulnerability in his voice was real, but it did not erase the years of being left out of the decisions or the way the trust had been treated like a resource Ethan could tap whenever he needed. Ethan pushed off the window. "Dad is not well. This stress is not helping. If you care about this family at all, you will let this go." I looked at both of them. The hurt was there, sharp and present, but so was the clarity. I had spent years telling myself that staying quiet was the mature thing, that pushing too hard would only make things worse. That had been the pattern. It had protected their comfort and left me carrying the questions alone. "I am not letting this go," I said. My voice was calm, but I felt the fierce edge underneath it. "Not this time." Our father closed his eyes for a moment. Ethan's face hardened. The room felt smaller, the air thicker with everything that had been left unsaid for years. I stood up. "I will be in touch with the attorney who handles the trust. We are going to fix what can be fixed. And then I am done." I walked out before either of them could answer. The drive back down the hill was quiet. My hands were steady on the wheel. The vulnerability was still there, the ache of realizing how deep the deception had gone and how long our father had allowed it. But there was something else, to something stronger. I had the memo, I had the statements, I had the admission, and I had the decision I had been circling for weeks. I was not going to carry this alone anymore. I was not going to sign anything or stay silent to keep the peace. The boundary was already forming, clear and necessary. Whatever came next, I would face it with the same strategic focus I used at work, but this time it was for myself. James texted again that night. "Everything okay?" "You seemed off today." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. "Family stuff. Complicated. I might need to take some time to sort it out." His answer came quickly. "Take the time you need. But if you want to talk, I am here. Just be careful how far you push. Some things are not worth the cost." I set the phone down without answering. The cost was already being paid. The question was whether I was willing to keep paying it in silence, or whether I was finally ready to walk away from the version of family that had required me to stay small and unquestioning. I opened my laptop and started a new folder. This one was not just for evidence, it was for the plan, the next steps, the conversations I would need to have, and the ones I would choose not to have anymore. The truth was out in the open now, at least between the three of us. What happened next would depend on how far I was willing to go to protect what was left of my own peace. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to find out. The days after that conversation in the study blurred together as I tried to sort through what my father had admitted and what it meant for everything I had believed about our family. The vulnerability in his voice had stayed with me, but so had the clear understanding that his silence had let my older brother turn the trust into something it was never meant to be. I spent the next morning on the phone with Thomas Hale. the attorney who had drafted the original trust documents for our grandfather years earlier. He remembered the file without much prompting and agreed to review the statements I had gathered. When we spoke, his tone stayed measured, but the words carried weight. These transfers do not align with the stated purpose of the trust, he said. If your brother was moving funds without full disclosure to the other trustee or beneficiaries, that raises questions about fiduciary responsibility. We should consider a formal demand for accounting first. The suggestion landed with a mix of relief and fresh tension. A formal demand meant putting everything in writing, making the deception official in a way that could not be waved off as a misunderstanding. I thanked him and promised to send the documents that afternoon. As soon as the call ended, I felt the old ache return sharper now because my father's admission had removed the last excuse I had given myself for staying quiet all these years. At the office, I tried to focus on a risk assessment for a new client, but the numbers kept blurring. James Rivera stopped by my desk mid-morning with 2 coffees and a careful look. "You have been staring at the same screen for 20 minutes, he said, setting 1 cup down. "If the family situation is getting heavier, maybe take a step back before it starts showing up in your work. I have seen people let personal stuff bleed into deadlines, and it never ends well for them here." His concern sounded genuine, yet the phrasing stung. It felt like another quiet question about where my loyalty should land. I managed a short answer about handling it and thanked him for the coffee. He lingered a moment longer than usual before walking away, and I caught the small crease between his eyebrows. Part of me wanted to explain everything right there to show him the memo Amanda Chen had given me and the statements that proved the pattern. Another part of me stayed silent because I already knew how it would sound. From the outside, a daughter digging into family money after years of distance. James had not said the word loyalty again, but it hung between us anyway. By mid-afternoon, I had scanned and organized everything into a clean packet for Thomas Hale. The insider memo from Amanda sat on top, its careful language, now looking like a roadmap of exactly how my older brother had framed the moves to the accountant. I added my own timeline of dates and amounts, cross-referenced against the times my father had claimed funds were tight. The picture was colder in writing than it had felt in my head. Money meant for long-term security had been redirected into accounts that only my brother controlled, and some of it had left those accounts for expenses that had nothing to do with family needs. I hit send on the email to Thomas just before 5. The confirmation screen felt final in a way that made my chest tighten. I was no longer just asking questions in private. I was asking someone with authority to look at the record. That evening, my mother called while I was still sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop open. Her voice sounded thin and rushed. "Your father has not been sleeping well since you came up here," she said. "The doctor mentioned stress could be affecting his blood pressure again. I'm not saying this is all on you, but maybe we could pause everything for a little while just until he feels steadier." The words landed with the familiar weight of obligation. I pictured my father in the big leather chair, smaller than I remembered, and the way he had looked at the floor when he admitted signing the papers. The vulnerability in me rose fast, the old habit of wanting to smooth things over so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. I closed my eyes and let the feeling pass without agreeing. "I cannot pause this," I told her. "Not after what I have seen. I will make sure the attorney keeps everything as contained as possible, but I am not dropping it." She stayed quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into something closer to disappointment. "I just do not understand why you cannot let your brother handle what he has always handled. He has always taken care of these things so the rest of us did not have to worry." The sentence sat between us like a line drawn years ago that I had finally decided to cross. I ended the call gently but without promising anything. After I hung up, the apartment felt too quiet. I made myself a simple dinner I barely tasted and went back to the laptop, pulling up the trust documents one more time to double-check the language around beneficiary rights. Around 9, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. The message was short and direct. "I know you met with Hale today. If you keep pushing this through lawyers and banks, you will force us to respond in ways that protect the family. Think carefully before you burn every bridge." No name, but I did not need one. My older brother had never been subtle when he wanted to control the outcome. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The threat was not new, but the timing made it land harder. He was already moving to cut off the path I had just opened. The strategic part of me started listing what I needed to do next. Document the text, send a copy to Thomas, consider whether to involve the bank directly now that the trust accounting had been requested. The vulnerable part of me felt the old loneliness rise again, the sense that standing up had always meant standing alone. I saved the text and added it to the folder. Then I opened a fresh document and began drafting the language for a formal inquiry to the bank that held the trust assets. I kept the tone factual, listing the specific transfers and the memo that showed the intent behind them. My hands stayed steady, even though my stomach felt tight. This was no longer about convincing my family to see what they had done. It was about creating a record that could not be ignored. I was halfway through the draft when another message came through, this one from James. Quick heads up from something I overheard today. Someone in compliance mentioned a family trust inquiry that sounded familiar. If that is, you be careful. These things can turn into bigger reviews fast and not always in the direction you expect. I set the phone down without replying. The secondary pressure was building from two directions now. My colleague was signaling that work could become complicated if this spilled over. My brother was signaling that he would make the personal cost as high as possible. Both messages carried the same underlying question about where my loyalty should sit and what I was willing to risk to answer it. I finished the draft inquiry and saved it. The document sat ready on the screen, one click away from becoming something official. I knew once I sent it, the process would move faster than I could control. Banks and trust companies did not like unresolved questions about asset movement. They would ask for explanations, and explanations would force my father and my older brother to put their versions on record. The thought should have felt satisfying. Instead, it left me sitting in the quiet kitchen with the same raw mix of hurt and determination that had been growing since the first mismatched number. I had spent years telling myself that keeping the peace was the responsible choice. That choice had let the slush fund grow and the explanations stay vague. Tonight, the choice felt different. It felt like the only one left that did not require me to keep pretending the pattern did not exist. I hovered the cursor over the send button on the inquiry email to the bank. The text from my brother still glowed on my phone beside the laptop. Outside the window, the city lights stretched out in the distance, the hillside enclave, somewhere among them, quiet and protected behind its gates. I thought about the way my father had looked at the floor and the way my mother's voice had tightened when she asked me to pause. Then I thought about the memo Amanda had risked sharing and the way James's concern had started to sound like a warning about my own judgment. My finger clicked send before I could second guess it again. The confirmation appeared instantly. The inquiry was now in the system. Somewhere in the next few days, someone at the bank would open it and begin asking the questions I had spent weeks gathering the courage to ask out loud. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. This time it was Thomas Hill. The message was brief. Received your packet. Also received a call from your brother this evening claiming you are attempting unauthorized access to family accounts. We should speak first thing tomorrow before any responses go out. I read it twice. The counter move had already begun. My older brother was not waiting for the formal process to unfold. He was framing the story, first positioning me as the one creating problems, rather than the one uncovering them. The vulnerability in my chest tightened into something sharper. He had spent years managing the narrative inside the family. Now he was trying to manage it outside as well. I closed the laptop and sat back. The apartment felt smaller again, the same way it had the night he had shown up at the door with the non-disclosure. But this time, I did not feel the same urge to smooth anything over. The record existed now in more than one place. The memo, the statements, the text, thread the attorney's notes. Whatever came next would have to answer to those facts, not just to the version my brother preferred. I picked up the phone and typed a short reply to Thomas. Understood. I will be available first thing. I have additional documentation if needed. Then I set the phone face down and let the quiet settle. The decision had moved beyond conversations in kitchens or studies. It was in the system now, and the system would not care about old patterns of who was supposed to handle what. It would only care about the paper trail. Somewhere in the hillside enclave, my father was probably still awake, my mother probably still worrying, and my older brother was probably already planning the next step to contain what I had started. I did not know exactly how any of them would respond once the bank began its review. I only knew that I had stopped waiting for permission to ask the questions that had been sitting unanswered for years. The phone stayed dark on the table. I left it there and went to bed without checking it again. Whatever the morning brought, the record was already moving forward on its own. The morning after I sent the inquiry, Thomas Hale called early. His voice carried the same measured calm from the day before, but the news had shifted. Your brother reached out again last night. He said he is claiming the transfers were authorized and that you are attempting to create conflict where none exists. I advised him that any formal response should come through me. The bank has acknowledged receipt of your inquiry and assigned a trust officer named Elena Vargas to review the account history. Elena Vargas contacted me later that same morning. She spoke with professional directness and asked for the full packet I had already prepared. When I mentioned the memo from Amanda Chen and the conversation where my father had admitted signing documents without full review, she noted both without comment. We will treat this as a formal request for accounting and clarification, she said. Until we complete the initial review, certain movements on the account will be paused for verification. The pause felt like the first real shift in power. For years, the trust had moved according to my older brother's explanations and my father's signatures. Now someone outside the family was looking at the record with no loyalty to old patterns. At the office, James pulled me aside after a team meeting. His expression stayed friendly, but the concern from earlier had sharpened. I heard through a couple of people that you filed something with a bank about a family trust, he said quietly. If this turns into any kind of formal dispute, it could raise flags in compliance. I am not telling you what to do with your family, but I have seen situations like this damage reputations on both sides. Are you sure this is the hill you want to stand on right now? The question landed with the same sting as before. It was not outright accusation, yet it carried the weight of loyalty again. I met his eyes and kept my voice steady. I am sure I cannot keep pretending the numbers add up when they do not. If that creates complications here, I will deal with them, but I am not walking away from the record just because it became inconvenient for everyone else. James nodded slowly. He did not push further, but the distance between us had grown. I felt the loss of his easy support, yet the choice felt necessary. Protecting the peace at work had started to look too much like the old habit of protecting the peace at home. By the end of the week, Elena Vargas scheduled a review call that included Thomas Hale, my older brother, and my father. My mother joined on speaker from the hillside enclave. The call began with Elena reading the specific transfers and the dates. She then referenced the internal memo Amanda Chen had provided and asked for explanations on record. My older brother spoke first, his tone controlled but edged with the same contempt I had heard at my door. This is a family matter that has been twisted into something it is not. My sister has always had a tendency to see problems where the rest of us see normal management. Dad signed everything because he trusted me to handle the details. There is no slush fund. There is only responsible movement of assets during a time when liquidity mattered. I let the words sit. Then I spoke, keeping my voice even. The memo shows you described the moves as reallocations for opportunity. The account the money entered was never disclosed to the other beneficiary. Some of those funds later covered personal expenses that had nothing to do with the trust purpose. I have the statements. My father's voice came through the line quieter than the others. I signed the authorizations Ethan brought me. I did not ask for full statements every time. I trusted him to manage what I could not. That was a mistake I see now. The admission in front of Elena Vargas and Thomas Hale carried more weight than the one he had given me in the study. My older brother tried to interrupt, but Elena cut in with professional firmness. The review will continue with a full forensic look at the receiving accounts. Until that is complete, the trust remains under restricted status. Any further unauthorized movement will be reported. The call ended with my brother's voice tight and low. You have no idea what you have started. This family will not forget this. I did not answer. The record was already speaking louder than any of us. Over the next 2 weeks, the review produced the concrete consequences none of them could spin away. Elena Vargas confirmed that a significant portion of the redirected funds had moved into accounts my older brother controlled personally and had been used for expenses unrelated to family security or trust management. The bank issued a formal notice requiring restitution to the trust and removed him as co-trustee. My father received a separate letter noting his failure to exercise proper oversight. Word traveled through the affluent hillside enclave faster than any of us expected. Neighbors and longtime family friends began asking careful questions at the club or during weekend gatherings. Amanda Chen later told me that someone in the old accounting circle had mentioned the review in passing. The story that reached the enclave was not the version my brother had tried to control. It was the version backed by bank records and an internal memo. My parents' standing shifted from respected longtime residents to people whose financial arrangements were now quietly discussed as troubled. My mother called once more during those weeks. She sounded smaller than before. The neighbors are asking questions we cannot answer without making it worse. Your father's doctor said the stress is affecting his recovery from the last episode. I know you think we deserve this, but I am asking you one last time to find a way to settle this quietly. I felt the pull of old obligation again, the vulnerability that came from still caring about their comfort, even after everything. I let the feeling move through me without agreeing. The bank has already made the process formal. I will not interfere with their review, and I will not pretend the trust was managed correctly when it was not. If you and Dad want to make different choices going forward, that is up to you. But I am done managing the story for everyone else. She did not call again after that. My older brother sent one final text 2 days later. You wanted to burn it all down. Congratulations. The family is done with you. Do not contact any of us again. I read it once, saved it with the rest of the documentation and blocked the number. The no contact boundary settled into place with quiet finality. It was not dramatic. It was simply the end of pretending that loyalty required me to accept deception and then stay silent about it. Claire Bennett, a friend I had known since my first year at the firm, came over that weekend with takeout and no expectations. She listened without offering advice until I finished describing the last call and the blocked number. Then she said simply, "You did what you had to do to stop carrying their choices. That is not selfish, that is survival." Her words stayed with me. I had spent years measuring my own worth against how little trouble I caused. Walking away from that measurement felt like the first honest breath I had taken in a long time. The bank completed its review and required full restitution of the misdirected funds plus interest into the trust. My older brother lost access to the accounts and faced professional questions at his own firm once the details became part of public trust records. My parents stepped back from social commitments in the enclave. The community that had once treated them as fixtures now treated them as people whose private arrangements had become uncomfortably public. Their standing was not destroyed by any single announcement. It eroded through the quiet conversations that followed the bank's formal actions. I received a letter from Elena Vargas confirming that my share of the trust had been protected and that future distributions would follow the original terms without further interference from unauthorized parties. I did not celebrate. I simply filed the letter with the rest of the record and went back to my work with a clearer mind than I had carried in months. James and I never returned to the easy colleagues rhythm we once had. He remained professional, but the questions about loyalty had created a permanent distance. I accepted it as part of the cost. Protecting my peace at home had required accepting that not everyone at work would understand or agree. I focused on the cases in front of me and let the rest settle. Months later, I sat on the small balcony of my apartment with the city spread out below and the hillside enclave visible in the distance. The trust documents rested in a secure folder on my laptop, no longer something I checked every week. My older brother had kept his word about no further contact. My parents had not reached out either. The silence felt different from the old loneliness. It felt chosen. I thought about the version of myself who had once believed that staying quiet and fixing what I could was the responsible path. That version had protected everyone except herself. The woman sitting on the balcony now understood that actions, not words or old roles, proved real loyalty. My father's admission and my brother's threats had shown me exactly where their loyalty had always sat. My choice to stop accepting the pattern had shown me where mine belonged. I had walked away from the version of family that required me to stay small. What remained was the quiet independence I had built while they managed the story without me. The boundary held, the record stood, and for the first time in years, the weight I carried belonged only to me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever discovered that someone you trusted had been quietly draining what was meant to protect you while others looked away, would you have cut contact once the truth was finally on record?